Hey everyone, welcome to this week's podcast. I'm a little bit off screen at the moment. I have to grab my microphone. But welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Josh, and that's Al right there. And Al, what's shaking?
Well, I'm currently coming from you live from an earthquake zone. So, pretty much everything is shaking right now. Just so if for you guys who are not aware, we had um, about a 5.2 earthquake here about an hour ago in San Diego, about 11 miles from where my current location is. So, a little bit of shaking, definitely I definitely felt it quite a bit because I'm fairly close to the epicenter. But no damage, no injuries to be reported as of yet. So that's good. But it's a hell of a way to start your Monday when the house and everything around you and the whole neighborhood is shaking. Um,
Yeah. I think this is what we get for keep saying what could possibly go wrong.
yeah, yeah. Well, we got the earthquake out of the way, so.
Oh, we didn't get the big one out of the way,
We
so
we did it. We did it. We're still waiting on that one. Still waiting on that one.
Anyways, welcome to the podcast, everyone. Each week, Al and I challenge and take on a different subject on risk in our industries, whether it be cybersecurity, physical security, operational security, public safety, life safety, anything in between. And as we promised last week at our ISC wrap up, we were talking about leadership this week, the changing tides of the CISO and the CSOs. And it's interesting because there is a shift. I'm not sure I agree with the shift, but let's see where this goes. So, Al, why don't you kick us off really quickly and just highlight what we're talking this week on?
Yeah, so there's been, it's definitely an interesting job market right now for a lot of people, especially security professionals. A lot of budgets have been cut. A lot of, as we kind of mentioned in the ISC recap video, there's been a lot of emphasis on technology to augment and supplement the workforce. So kind of brings us to an interesting place in the security world as to um, who is better equipped to lead the security teams in the future? Is it the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, or is it the Chief Security Officer? And a little bit of kind of differentiation here. I'm gonna simplify this to the simplest terms. There's obviously more nuance to this, but just for time's sake and simplicity, your Chief Security Officer typically handles everything in the physical realm. So that's, gates, guards, barriers, physical security systems, cameras, access control, um, and then depending on the size of the organization, executive protection, any type of travel security, travel risk, if you're, fairly mobile workforce. But those are traditionally fallen under, the budget of the chief security officer. And it's typically its own accounting code, line item budget, and it's got its own pot of money to handle that. And then you got the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, which typically handles everything in the realm of cyber, right? So that's protecting the information systems, protecting the users, any type of cloud systems that are integrated. And then there's, the policies and procedures for actual information handling within the organization. And, that has traditionally been the lane of the CISO. And traditionally, what we've seen is they're two separate offices, and there's typically not a lot of crosstalk, unless unless you talk to the physical security systems guys. They've probably had the most crosstalk between the organizations. However, kind of as we've mentioned and talked through in a couple other podcasts, convergence, right? Lots of convergence the last few years where cyber and physical are rapidly becoming, one. one thing, one office of, you can't really do your job as a physical security guy unless you have some type of understanding of the cyber threats, because a lot of our devices now are IoT devices, or have Wi-Fi, have IP addresses, and so we have to have a firm understanding of how that device can be exploited, and that in itself typically tends to be the CISO's lane, right? Um, and then from the other side of the coin, there is a lot of design planning and security planning that has to go, you know, or the CISO has got to be involved in when thinking about how to best protect the company's information. Um, so who are the guys who understand the physical space planning and safety, security, environment, crime prevention through environmental design? It's typically your physical guys. So, what we've seen kind of in probably the last few years, I'll throw a little baseline kind of date out there, like since COVID, because everyone's familiar with COVID. Since about COVID, we've seen a real blurring of the lines, a real kind of blended approach to how we address some of these issues. So, therein lies the question: who should be in charge? Who should be the guy who makes the call, a guy or gal who makes the call on what direction we go with a certain program, or who should control the budget, where should the money be allocated? And the other question is, like, is it even possible? Is it even possible for one person to be able to cover down on all these responsibilities and effectively advise the business, the C-suite, on all the potential threats and risk factors to their company, whether it be physical or cyber. Um, so I think that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's kind of the pros and cons of both, where we kind of see this moving in the future, or at least our opinion on it. I mean, obviously companies are going to make their own decisions as to what they're going to do, and that's fine. But me and Josh have our opinions on this, and I think we'll share our opinions, and love to hear anyone else's opinion out there. Chime in and drop us a note, drop us a comment, let us know, like, hey, you think that we're both completely wrong and it's going to go this way. Love the discussion, so it's all good.
Yeah. So I think that the really cool thing to understand, and I love what Stephen Bernard, the former CSO for Sony Pictures, made a comment about the whole idea of the traditional, and I'm going to air quote CSO in air quotes here. The whole traditional CSO has been the fusion of both physical security and information security under one individual. And so, that seems to be in the historical role. And at some point, that CSO role came and split off and went more into distance to being more the physical security role versus that duality role of both physical and cyber under, one hat. Why? Don't know. But, we could have tons of conversations about that.
Yeah, in that, in my opinion on that aspect of why kind of it moved in the direction of physical is I think ultimately when you create a new position, and traditionally a chief security officer from a C-suite perspective is a relatively new position. Most businesses before probably 2010 didn't even consider a chief security officer. I mean, yeah, you kind of had your chief legal officer, or like, you'd have your VP of facilities, and the security director was kind of somewhere under there, right? Either under legal or under facilities. And, structurally, there was no one really advising the CEO or the C-suite on security matters, um, until about 2010. Then we started seeing some more movement there of like chief security, like we need a chief security officer. There's too much stuff going on. Ironically, it's because a lot of the hacks were happening. And so it was kind of a cyber driven events, which forced the issue, which is ironic in my opinion. But we got to look at who are they recruiting for chief security officers. A lot of times it was retired federal law enforcement, Secret Service, FBI, DEA, Department of Justice, pick your three-letter agency. It was typically somebody who had spent significant time working for the government, doing some type of physical security or some type of threat vulnerability assessment. And ultimately, I think the 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 retired government, investigators are great at a lot of stuff, but again, you default to what you know. What do those guys really know well? They know physical really well, unless they came from the relatively newer, cyberspace offices that had been created right around 2012 ish. Typically you're going to default to physical. On top of that, like physical security, and it's a massive undertaking on its own. So there's also the argument that, well, if the CIO is going to handle a lot of this, I'm just going to focus my energy on the physical side because the CIO's got all the networking piece and just make sure I have Wi-Fi and the guard shack and we're good, right? So I think a lot of different factors, but I think that's kind of how we ended up to where we're at today, right? And on top of that, I think there's the other piece of that is just the speed at which cyber moves. That it was just obvious that we needed experts in that lane, like full-time experts in that lane, to do the cybersecurity piece. It just wasn't gonna like physical guys just weren't gonna be able to do it, no matter how good they were. They just weren't gonna be able to do it. It's just they couldn't move at that speed.
Right. I think that's going to be, interesting here, just to see where things are going to go because, you know, I think the shifting of the roles is not because of the shifting of the roles or the responsibilities. I think the shifting is um, not because the CISO is knowledgeable about physical security. I think it's because the CISO has a seat at the table. I
Yeah,
think that's the only reason why it's shifting. And uh, uh, maybe it needs to be there, maybe it does not to be there. But the facto is that the CISO is there is not because they want to be there, but by virtue of the fact that they've been beaten up so many times that they have the ear of the board and leadership, and why the Security Exchange Commission is requiring that you have a subject matter expert be on your board, either at minimum as an advisor, but ideally at the seat, talking and consulting and advising the board on these various security matters. So, my thought right now is that yes, the roles are kind of coming back together, but at the same time, um, I don't know if it actually really should be there because even in my time, even I'm heavily on the cyber side and I cross into the physical side, I'm still learning. And there's so much there I'm still learning. And, yes, there are some overlaps in, how we talk about things and how we view things, but, there's also a lot of commonalities, but there's a lot of differences in actually how the industry in our respective industries look at things.
right.
And so, when I'm looking at that, I'm kind of go, I'm not inclined to say that, you know, it should be all in the CISO role. Um, Maybe in terms of budgeting, heck, yes. I think there's some excellent, excellent synergies and opportunities to work in a collaborative manner that you can do more together with your respective budgets, while actually reducing your budget costs overall. But I think about it. There's just way more to do in the physical security realm than just simply protecting my data center, protecting my buildings. I mean, as you brought up rightfully, executive protection. The average CISO doesn't think about life safety at the executive level. Maybe in general, like for the entire population. So when it specifically comes to IT and maybe their data centers, but when it comes to overall life safety, that is something that they don't really think about. Or what about workplace violence? or active shooter programs, fire programs. You have all these little small little individual programs that make up the physical security space. And I think the average cybersecurity person wouldn't think about that, let alone, by the way, the governance programs behind your cameras or the network video recorders, or, what governs and constitutes an incident to actually require you to go, fetch data or preservation of information. There's all these little small little nuances on a mature physical security program that I would say that the average CISO or cybersecurity leader would not be thinking about. And that's where I kind of like, I don't agree that it should come together, but at the same time, I think there are, benefits to coming together at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that there is, when I look at it holistically from like an overall risk perspective, right? We look at the threat vectors, definitely cyber. You're probably gonna have more cyber incidents than physical incidents. I mean, the data is there to kind of show that. However, when you consider like the second and third order effects of physical incidences, right? The legality of not handling a physical incident correctly, you know, it falls directly on the company, right? You can't really hide behind third party vendors on a physical incident, especially when there's physical harm or life safety involved. It's really like, were you negligent? Did you provide enough safety and security that a reasonable person would consider that was reasonable, as a reasonable safeguard? Or, were you negligent? And then not just because it wasn't a priority or because you weren't aware that you needed something is not a good excuse in a court of law. Like that definition of negligence, right? You should have done something and you didn't do it, and ignorance of the standard is not a good, again, not a good excuse. You're negligent. And so I agree with you. I feel like, you know, a lot of physical security programs are very mature, but they've matured to a point where we don't have a lot of physical incidences, and that's a good thing. And I think that's something that a lot of people kind of gloss over is like because we have for years too. I mean, we're talking post World War II, um, and trying to stop adversaries from gaining technical information on weapon systems. All that's been iterated on and carried over. So the physical world has been able to really mature over the last 70 plus years or so, where cyber is still it's still newer. It's definitely way more mature than it was 10 years ago, but the physical security programs have matured so much to a point that we know to, almost a scientific exact percentage point. Like if we do X, Y, and Z, we minimize risk to the physical space, exponentially, right? And the insurance companies are involved in that. They understand, the type of fencing, the type of perimeter, the type of guards, the type of cameras that you have, all go into the risk profile of the insurance policy, the insurance policy that the company's going to pay for, right? I don't think we've gotten to that point yet with cyber. Obviously you got to have something, and the insurance is looking at it, but on the physical side, I mean, you get down, if you have a certain type of fencing, we'll drop your premium a certain amount because by a certain percentage point, because we've done the math on it, right? And so the unfortunate consequence of that is because these programs are so mature and they've done so well to prevent a lot of incidences that we kind of just assume it's the baseline, right? Without understanding that there's years of programmatic data and policies that have been in place and programs and government offices that have helped support getting these programs off the ground and implemented that we just assume that a safe workplace and all that is just the baseline, and that's how most people are, and that's a good thing. It's good that our expectation is the baseline is that nothing happens. But it's also like we have to understand that if we if we if we veer too far off of that structure, right? Like things start slipping through the cracks. And then all of a sudden we do this slingshot thing of, oh my God, we've neglected our, our fire program, and now we had a catastrophic event. We didn't have briefings or fire drills, which because we were more worried about something else. And so, for me, I feel like both, I think any organization needs to look at this and say, okay, I need both of these functions, and I need extremely high quality people in both these offices to help build really good, strong programs. Um, what's the most efficient way and effective way to do that? So I don't let something slip under the cracks, but then I'm not exposed somewhere else, right? Um, and so I think I think it will be interesting to see what the right answer is, and what models kind of come out of this. Because I think what I'm kind of seeing too is we're seeing the fractional model quite a bit, right? Where, maybe you have, and I think every company needs to go back. Every organization's got to has to look at their workforce and what's going to work for them and their company structure. Because, for example, we have a lot of companies out there where the majority of the workforce is remote. So I got it. If the majority of your workforce is remote and they're working in the cloud collaboratively to get things done, does your physical security program need to be as strong as, say, a company where everybody is coming to the office, or on a hybrid schedule where 3 days a week you've got an influx of people coming in, and then 2 days people are at home? I think we have to kind of go back to the drawing board and really ask ourselves, like, where am I most exposed, right? If I've got a remote workforce, 100%, I think the answer is your CISO and your cyber team have to be strong. You could probably take a little bit of risk on the physical security side because you're not consolidating people, um, into one area frequently. However, all that being said, you still need a workplace violence program, right? You still need to have that. You still gotta be able to effectively track and monitor where your people are going if they're traveling. So you still need a travel safety program. Um, and you like, what happens if somebody gets hurt or gets assaulted while they're traveling, or even if they're leaving their house and going down to pick up some groceries and something happens? You got to have someone who's going to manage that, right? Um, and so there's still going to be a need for some type of physical security presence even in those situations, right? Because by law and by mandate, most companies are being required to have these programs in place. So, um, I think, to me, that's likely where we're going to move to, where we have companies really evaluating, okay, I've only got a set source of, a set pot of money to handle all this stuff. What's my biggest risk vector? What's my biggest need? And let's make that happen. Um, when it comes to the seat at the table piece of it, I think at least I hope that, the assassination that happened back in December, um, I hope most boards and C-suites are looking at that and saying, hey, we need someone here to tell us that we're operating in a way that is not conducive to the safety of our people, and somebody needs to call it out. And so I'd hope both would have a seat at the table, even if it's maybe a non-voting seat, but an advisory seat, where you advise, courses of actions. But I think I, from to your point, like, you got to remember what people are focused on, right? Like the CFO, he's focused on the money. He's focused on profitability. Like, we're spending too much money. We gotta turn a profit, guys. So when he's at the table, what's he worried? He's worried about the money aspect, right? The CRO is worried about getting the revenue, and the COO just wants to make sure the ship can keep moving, right? And then the CEO is trying to take it all in and make decisions for everyone. Um, but we value all the input so we can make the best decision. If you're, if you're in the C-suite, you value the input of every office there, so you can make the best decision for the business, right? So I would hope that, you know, both would have a seat at the table to advise at least, right? And so the business can make the best decision because we've seen time and time again businesses making decisions that we're like, was no one there to advise you to tell you that was a bad idea? How was that not obvious to you, right? But to your point, like you gotta when you're in a C-level position, your priority is the gator closest to the boat. So you're not always focused on the other threats around you, right? You're focused on whatever the priority is that day, that week, that quarter that you got to get done, and you're hyper focused on that. You're not really worried about other stuff because you got other people to deal with it, right?
Yeah,
So, I think that's the benefit of having CISOs and CSOs at the table. And that's the benefit of having, senior advisors in both offices that can help you make the right decision, or at least help you get to the yes. And this is what I've always said about when I mentor physical security guys. I'm like, we have a tendency of saying no a lot because it's not safe or it's risky. And to me, that's the wrong answer. The right answer is I see the outcome that you want to get to. Let me help you get there. You increase your risk by doing it this way. We reduce the risk by doing it this way. And if we do it this way, you got a pretty high success rate. That's the approach that I think most physical guys should be taking. And unfortunately, a lot of times we just default to the no, 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 it's not safe. It's dangerous. It causes risk. It's like, well, you've got to keep the business moving, right? So if you're constantly
exactly.
saying no, 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 you're not a good advisor, right? I mean that advice just you're the no guy. There's a yes guy and there's a no guy. If you're the no guy, you're probably not going to get invited to the meeting anymore, right?
Yeah, and I think this is my perspective, at least my time spending in the industry. When you're looking at a typical 3G perspective, guns, guards, and gates perspective, I think the industry is very mature pre-America Online.
Yeah,
I think it's a very mature industry. But when we started getting, more towards the modernization of the physical security industry, I look at it as, and I'm going to probably date myself in this process. Hanna-Barbera, you have the Jetsons versus the Flintstones kind of situation, with cyber being the Jetsons and Flintstones being, the physical security industry. That space seems to be very, very immature as their technologies kind of start bringing it, integrating into an organization, into the enterprise, especially.
yeah,
And I think that's where, when we think about the maturity of the industry, there are disagreements between, the cyber people and the physical security people. You have physical people who are saying the industry is very, very mature. Yes, depending how you context
yeah,
and look at it.
yeah. How you frame maturity? Because I can tell you a lot of physical security. I mean, they're not incorporating all the technical logical advances that they could be to be more efficient.
Well,
And
not just that, like their concept of detection is still a manual detection
right,
process. It is a human driven process, not a technological driven process. And so, like the same thing for us in cyber, until you detect something, you won't trip your response process. And the same thing applies here. You can apply the NIST cybersecurity framework, get rid of cyber, just say the NIST security framework with, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. That still applies fundamentally and conceptually to the physical security industry.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
you identify your assets, you protect them, and then you're waiting for that boom. And then when
Right.
you have the right of boom incident, when usually in this industry, it's still very human driven. Oh yeah, hey, my car got stolen. Then it's when you go and pull the tapes. It's when you send assets down to start detecting. It start when and that's when it's really, really go time. But until you quote unquote have that incident, right there, that right of boom, you don't have any context, as to what it is. It's and every normal day, like just us in cyber. I would also offer, at least in cyber, and the physical security, is scale. Uh, there is a limitation, and I mean a limitation. There's a kind of a bit of a requirement for the physical adversary to cross. You have to be physically present. So that means they have to make a certain upfront investment cost to physically be there. So that means typically it's your local threats in your local areas. But beyond that, you don't have to typically deal with international threats. Unless it's an adversary who decides to plop down an asset, in front of your door, then you have a challenge at that point. Whereas the cyber folks, were connected to everybody in the net by virtue of an IP address. So we have to deal with everybody banging on our door, including someone living in their mom's basement across the way.
Yep.
And so, that scale of that adversary attack is just way greater. So I would not say that the maturity is less in cyber. I would just say we have more to contend with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to frame it. Good way to put it. Um,
And and by virtue of just the sheer volume we have to do it, it puts a lot of pressure on the processes and our maturity. And sometimes we get it right, and oftentimes we don't, because we're always having to not evolve with a finite set of threats, but we're having to deal with an uh, infinite set of evolving threats that keeps coming at you on a 24/7, 366 basis. And it may feel like, it's endless, but it isn't, unless you're a nation state like China banging on your door. But, for the most part, if you think about it, they're having to contend with an ever evolving threat that is readily someone attacking you 24/7, 366, just around the globe, following the sun based on who's where, whatever. And I think that's something to be keeping in mind here as we look at these evolutions of our respective security programs. And I think the cyber people gets that, but they often think about it from the bigger perspective, because that's how we're trained to think about things. We're trained to look at the macro picture. And I think the traditional physical security people, um, depending on who you are, but most tend to look inward in more because of the locality of things. And so you have a very micro focus, not just, saying it's, overly detailed and, your tunnel vision. No, I'm just saying it's, the view is very, very different. It's very, specific and focused
well,
to
we
helping
have we
understand
have
things.
specific barriers that we have to, or specific boundaries that we have to protect, right? Where you know, this gets really challenging for cyber guys, in my opinion, because it's like you don't have boundaries, right? Like, I mean, the cyber realm is the cyber realm. As long as somebody has ability to gain access to the internet, or gain a signal, they have the ability to be a threat, right? Whereas I just have to stop you from getting to the building or getting to an employee. So I can, it's very easy to kind of focus on that. I know what the boundaries are for my domain. And I know that if I can keep you out or delay you long enough that I can interdict you, then I'm good, right? But once you're gone, once the threat is gone, or once we've eliminated the threat or mitigated the threat, I can breathe a sigh of relief, and I can be like, okay, cool. They tried this, they tried that, and then the evolution as well, to your point, the evolution in the physical world. I mean, there's only so many ways you can scale a fence, right? I mean, there's more than one way to do it, but there's only so many ways. And then the more complicated it gets, Murphy's Law, the more chances of failure and detection there are, in the physical space. So, my risk versus likelihood in the physical world looks much different than my cyber guys, right? My cyber guys, the risk versus likelihood is high on pretty much everything because if you can't try one way to breach the castle in the cyber world, well, it's really easy to try another way, and then another way, and then another way, and then another way, and you can iterate very quickly in that space. For minimal dollars, if you're a threat too, for minimal dollars,
Yeah.
your risk versus reward payoff for a threat, trying to come in on the cyber side is really big versus your risk versus reward payoff on the physical side, not so much. I mean, so it's definitely it's one of those things where the cyber guys sheer volume of events and incidences and attempts. If we had that same level in the physical world, I mean, it would be insanity. It would be almost like an all-out war, right? I mean, we would literally have, you know, the the enemies at the gates daily trying to break in, kick the gate in, trying to come in, and people would never want to leave the office because as soon as they leave, there's going to be someone chasing them and trying to gain access, right? So, um, I think it's just it's two different type of animals that we're trying to contain, right? Um,
Yeah.
and both of these fields are, you know, they can. I don't think there's anyone who could be a generalist in both fields, and necessarily be very effective simply because each of these fields goes so deep, when it comes to, like how do you mitigate a cyber risk, right? If I ask someone that, if I ask a cyber guy that, they're like, well, man, I mean, what are we talking about on your phone, on your laptop, on your desktop, in the cloud? I mean, there's so much I can go there. If somebody asked me on the physical side, well, how do you protect a building? It's like, from what? Fire, earthquake, floods, rain, bad guys, aliens, dragons. I mean, like we can have a conversation for hours on what our plan would be on either realm. So, um, I think consolidating the offices and reducing budgets and potentially getting rid of, talent for the sake of saving money, I don't think that's the right answer personally. But I think if you retain the right people, you pair your budget with risk priority. I think now we're having a good conversation about how do you structure this office, right?
Right.
Where you're looking at your threat profile, which is what something that, like, every physical guy has tried to yell at the CEO and the COO about, like, please just mitigate your risk profile. If you're a retail outlet, your risk profile is probably insider risk. It's likely going to be shoplifting from the back warehouse, not the front. Like, pair the solution and the priority and the money to where you're going to be exposed most, right? And then go down the list from there. Same with cyber, right? So I feel like those conversations really got to happen about, like, I think from what I've seen, most companies do, like, they kind of go off a checklist, and I'll break this down of, like, you have your companies that have to do ISO compliance, right? So when you are required to do ISO compliance, you gotta run with a different playbook than if you're not falling under the compliance piece, right? Because you will be audited. You have to allocate the money, right? You have to allocate the money. You have to have the programs. You have to make sure that you fall under, an acceptable approach on the audit, right? If you're not necessarily at the size or scale to be, have to be ISO compliant, you have a lot more freedom to kind of review your programs and figure out where you're going to allocate. If you're going to allocate it, it really should be based on the risk to your employees, risk to your facilities, risk to your business. So I think anyone out there who's like looking for the magic answer, I think the magic answer is go back and review your risk profile for your business, and then prioritize based on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, and I'm thinking about this here. I could see a couple models that could be potentially happening. I think in the C-suite level, I think, and this is my opinion, I think there's going to be something like the equivalent of a chief convergence officer, essentially, who has a good understanding of both sides and can talk to both the physical and cyber folks. And then
Yeah.
you would have the CSO and then the CISO report to them
Yeah.
in that space. I've seen in a couple organizations where general counsel or the chief legal officer is there, and then the CSO and the CISO reports there because they look at it as just unified risk. So I can see it that way.
Right.
But I think the question becomes one of just uh, how does an organization value and manage the risk? And then they may, think that it may be worthwhile to split it and keep it away from like general counsel. It's better to keep them, at a unified standpoint, so they have a unified view. I don't like the idea of a CISO reporting to a CSO, and I'm not a fan, or I don't like the fact if a CSO reports to a CISO,
I
mainly
agree.
because neither side, in a traditional modern sense, understands each other very, very, very well. They would treat that as a director more than a subject matter expert on what needs to be done, because there's more inherent complexities that goes beyond just simply just their side of the fence, and it creates like an inherent conflict of interest. It's no different than a CIO being on top and the CISO reporting to the CIO in my space. I have some concerns about that, even though in some spaces it works well, and if there's a good relationship, it'll work. And I agree, in many cases it can work. But at the same time, though, what one organization does not mean that it works for your organization. It works for your
Right.
enterprise and your business, because every business is different. And so I think it really comes back down to a question of risk. Who gets that unfiltered yet sanitized version of understanding what is the risk priorities and coming up, and then that person who is reporting to the leadership just filtering everything up the just filtering everything so that the risk isn't coming through, everything looks perfectly peachy and rosy, and giving the boards all rose colored glasses. I have a concern about that, and that's my worry about here. If either side of the CSO or CISO, takes that top spot on there, and then they forget about their physical security
Right. For
parts.
cybersecurity side. Yeah. Vice versa. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think ultimately, I mean, the CEO is, if it's a public company, beholden to the shareholders to make the right decision on anything moving forward. And what, shareholders want to see growth. They want to see, obviously they invest in the company because they see potential, right? So they want to see growth. But I think where a lot of times what ends up happening is the the push for growth, short-term growth, right? Um, it's done in a way where decisions are made, and it 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 increases the risk profile to an intolerable level, right? And it's simply because there was no one advising. And I think that it's you want to have growth without taking on the additional risk. That's the ideal situation. High growth, low risk, right? Very hard to achieve at times, but that would be the ideal situation, right? So I think if you frame it in those terms of how do we achieve high growth but keep the risk low, now we have to look and see like, okay, who's best positioned to advise me on keeping the growth moving, but also mitigating the risks to my organization, right? So based on your organizational structure, based on like where your risk, exposure is, that is who in my opinion, that's who you want advising you. Who's going to mitigate, and that could always change. I think the other thing we get locked into is we're scared to shift the C-suite model too much, right? But I'm like, I'll use a former employer, Meta. I used to work at Meta, right? Well, Meta in 2004 was a very different company than Meta in 2019 when I was there, right? I mean, so if your big issue at Meta in 2004 was information security, 100% your CISO should be advising you on how to keep that platform moving with the lowest possible risk. But fast forward, 15 years, and you've got, at the time, close to 80,000 employees, and you've got offices globally. You need to have a physical security person there advising you on what your growth strategy is going to be and what's the impact and risk to the employees, the business, and the office spaces, right?
Yep.
Um, in addition to someone who can tell you what your cyber risks are, right? So I think it should always be evolving. We should always be looking at like, hey, CISO, you're awesome, but I've got a bunch of physical risks that, I got a bunch of office spaces and facilities and data centers that I got to contend with now. Um, and we've got an ISO and a SOC 2 compliance audit coming up. Do you know anything about this? I know the cyber side about the physical side. We're going to be completely okay. Let's bring up the CSO and have him advise us on this, how this works, right? Um, I like what you said about you know, well, actually, let me take it back. I mean, I think we were talking about fractional CISOs and CSOs. I think that's a good option for a lot of organizations right now who kind of are, you know, I know money's tight in the market right now. The market's a little crazy, so having to allocate headcount is a challenge right now. But looking at the fractional option, to address a concern that you have, I think that's a great option for a lot of organizations that may not be fully mature yet. You know, especially first starting out. A fractional CISO, I think, is an amazing concept because you're able to, in my opinion, get that high growth, lower risk. At least you've mitigated some of that risk because you have someone who you can call and advise on when you have the need for it, right? Versus having a full-time person there that you're paying on payroll, that may or may not be fully engaged at at whatever stage of the business you're at. And that's the physical side too. The CSO, fractional CSOs are out there as well, where, maybe you're just a small startup, 5 people, but now you need a workplace violence strategy. Okay, because the state's mandating it. Got it. Okay. Contact a fractional CSO. Hey, I just need you to create a workplace violence program for me so I have it on the books, brief my employees so they know what's going on. And then, if we have a need in the future for something else, we'll bring you in. Maybe you get your Series A, Series B, Series C, and you're funded, and you have 200, 300 employees you're renting office space now, right?
Yeah.
Contact a fractional CSO, bring them in. Maybe they get them a full-time job, right? Now there's a need for it, right?
Yeah, I think that's where the fun challenge is going to be too, because um, if you look at, like, I think this is, I'd be very curious about this, but one thing that I've been hearing is the workplace violence program has been ending up on CISO desks, and I
Yeah,
could go
yeah,
like, why? They're not equipped or trained to it. Oh, because it has, like, implications of security. Well, you're the security guy, so here you go.
yeah, right, right. I mean, and this, it's funny, but it's true too. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, there's a time when cybersecurity stuff would come to the CSO's desk, and some CSOs couldn't spell API. They didn't know what the hell you're talking about. API, what are you talking about? IP address, what's this? I mean, so it's like, well, yeah, but you're the security guy and this is cybersecurity. It's in the name. It's like, yeah, dude, you need to contact the IT department and have them set up an appointment with me. We need to talk through this because this, yeah, I'm the security guy, but it's not really my lane. you know?
Yeah. And I think, I think a lot of the cost savings and we're going to be looking at in the next, 3 to 4 years. I'm going to call it. I'll invoke our trademark saying what could possibly go wrong. Well, what could possibly go wrong is right now a Great Depression, self-induced, being isolated from the global economy. Um, I really think that what's going to happen is that um, the cost savings and the growth is going to be coming from having really strong synergies with your counterparts in other departments that deals with risks, that deals with security. Because what you're going to do is you're going to start consolidating tools. Like,
Yeah.
for example, like in my session with Holly and Chris and oh shoot, what's his name? I forgot. I apologize. But the four of us combined were making a point that there's a lot of ways that we can use existing technologies to actually bring a unified view, but at the same time, we reduce our licensing costs like exponentially, like using tools that are available to the IT people, as well as to the security people, as well as to the physical security people. Bringing all these tools and processes under one unified view, and it just makes for some fantastic automations, workflow, documentations. It just works well at that point.
Absolutely. I saw a company, a really interesting model. They were, the marketing team was leveraging security um, because the CSO and the CMO had a really good relationship. Um, and the marketing team was actually leveraging the security cameras for marketing campaigns. So they would check and see, like they would put their little displays out or their banners out, and they could check and see how many people were actually looking at the campaign, like actually looking at the sign, and then take it another step. How many people were looking at the sign, engaging the sign, and then moving into the store to actually, check around and see what was in the store and look at the item, and then take another step forward, figuring out like did it actually convert into a purchase, right? So how effective was that marketing campaign? That all came through the security cameras within the store to track people and check the conversion rates and all that. And that's that in my opinion, that's a great example of like marketing is now able to leverage a tool that security is already paying for, and it's not costing them anything because we're already paying the bill for it. So two critical teams are using this tool for completely different purposes, but the data is being used in different ways to help support the business. In my opinion, like that is, and you can make an argument that it hits the finance side too, right? Because now marketing is able to generate, they can make more effective campaigns and spend less money on their marketing efforts overall. So overall, there's value added to the business, right? Because teams are working together. To your point on tool consolidation, I mean, I see that. I think that's going to be the next iteration of this is where we're using multiple tools, like we're using multiple offices are using the same tooling, and using that data for different purposes, but everyone's got access to the same tooling. And that I think is why it's critical for CISOs and CSOs to have a seat at the table, because there's a lot of value that can be had, from having the discussion and conversations about, hey, like what's marketing's big concern today? What's finance's big concern?
Yeah.
And the security we may have a solution for that. Like but you weren't thinking that way because you haven't been advised on it. It's not your lane, right?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, people forget data is data. And
Right. Exactly.
it comes in many forms and formats and outputs, but at the end of the day, data is still very much data. And you can run it through any tool or anything that's capable of supporting and interpreting it. And that's where, the parsers, interpreters, the integrations come into come into view here. It's there to take that data and then converse it into something that the software program can actually interpret it. So like I think Sentinel-1 talked about how the fact they use Slack combined with some other stuff in their proprietary data lake and everything like that. But now they have a whole, view, so much to the point where, like, if someone, followed you and you allowed them, it actually automates the process for the cameras feeding into their systems. And you would get a Slack message to say, hi, did you allow someone to tailgate you? And everything like that. And if you click no, it kicks off a whole workflow of incidents. Or if you say yes, then you say why. It goes to that process. And then if you forgot violation policy or it was authorized and everything, there's a whole educational piece that comes behind it. But using something like that to help generate incidents and helping it to view things, is amazing. I think, and also in our session too as well, someone talked about using Splunk as well to
Yeah.
be the aggregator for data. And you think about it, there are a lot of SIM tools out there that are capable of that. So Splunk being one of them. You probably can use any other SIM or SOAR tool out there, maybe like an open source tool like a Security Onion or Waza. But the whole point is, you can bring and transform all this data into various platforms that you don't need to get that proprietary physical security tool. Maybe there is already a cybersecurity tool that you already purchased, and that $500,000 you have to spend on that version of a SIM in the physical security industry can be used. I think it's called PSIM, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Instead of buying a PSIM, just use the existing CyberSIM because it has all the capabilities already ready for you to use. You just got to write that connector, write that integrator, write that parser, so it interprets the data and the output out, so it's something that you can use. And at least in my opinion, all the PSIMs I've seen, um, they're good, but they're not great, and at least that's my opinion because I'm used to seeing the tools in the cyberspace, the cybersecurity world, and in the
Yeah.
industry. They seem to be more thought out and well built out, and there's a certain
100%. 100%. And that's another thing. I mean, I think that there's, when we talk about the future and convergence, I mean, I think that there's a lot of space for improvement in the physical security systems like world. There's a lot of problems that can be solved by having a conversation with the cyber guys and being like, "Hey, man, just the GUI on this thing is stupid looking. Like it's terrible. Like it's not user friendly. There's no good user experience. Like help us out here. Can you write something that's a little bit better?
and just curious, I've been quoted at least 500,000 for a PSIM. What's the cheapest PSIM that you've been quoted that you remember just off the top of your head? You don't need to name the brand, just the number. I'm just kind of curious.
I think we saw one for like 300K. It was not impressive. But but the point is you're going to be paying. I mean, whether it's half a
You're
million or a million or 100,000, I mean, you're still paying for something that why pay twice for something, right? So you already have the capability in house and resident, right? So leverage the capability, right? But
thinking from a total cost of ownership perspective, you can take that 300,000 and keep that budget, but allocate it in a different way. So if
right,
let's that first year of implementing on the cyber side, maybe you have to pay $300,000 to do the integrations and the connectors and everything like that. But then that's a one and done situation at that point. And then at that point, you can use that $300,000 and allocate to other elements or aspects of your security program, whether it be new equipment, new hardware, or other technologies. Or finally, you can get that robot dog that you always wanted from
right.
the vendors out there. But to your point exactly, it's like, why are we duplicating efforts? There's just no wisdom in duplicating efforts. So we may as well find a way to be smart about using the finite resources and dollars. And even if you and think about it too, you can also probably get some of the data, the money too, also from the cyber folks too as well, to help fund a little bit too as well. So combined, that 300,000 could go way more because maybe the cyber folks are having to spend that money on optimizing and modernizing their data centers. Well, they're going to need money for the new badge readers and all that stuff too. you have all these opportunities to work together if done correctly.
Absolutely. I mean, and honestly, I mean, we pay a lot of money to integrators to get stuff installed and configured and all that. Um, I mean, if the CISO's team can help with that, it it's a cost savings there, right? Not that I want to relegate the CISO's team to integration at all, but what you find is you have a third party integrator coming in integrating, right? Um, but a conversation wasn't had between the CISO and the CSO, and something got missed. Now we're bringing the integrator back to do something else, right? To correct something. Um, Not efficient use of money, funds, time, or anything, right?
Yeah.
Now integrators love it. They love it. Yeah, don't have the conversation. They got to come back twice and charge a high bill because integrators are a commodity right now. I mean, they're not enough in the market to get everything done. But I mean, the point is the synergy, right? We want to maintain the synergy, and the only way to do that is to really work together, and not just CISO and CSO, but like every C, like let's have a conversation. Let's sit down and talk.
Yeah. All right. So I think the conclusion here is it's inevitable. But I think it still comes back to the same themes that we've been talking about here. It's still about the business. It's still about about supporting and enabling the business, and it's still about making the business cases to anything that we're trying to do. It's just going to take some weird shape or forms in each organization, if I'm hearing our conversation correct.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I'm interested to see what new structures kind of come out in the next 2 or 3 years when it comes to security in general.
Maybe sooner, honestly.
Yeah, it'd probably be the next year, to be honest. Just due to the market conditions. I mean, it's no secret, right? Like companies are downsizing, which means, you know, people in certain roles are having to take on more, sometimes learn things that they were like, what? You want me to be the intelligence guy too? I don't know anything about that, right? And so, I think it's gonna be interesting to see how some of these things happen. I think that I really do believe the fractional roles are really going to take off as people, try to grow their businesses in the current market conditions and try to maintain growth. I think the fractional model looks really good for a lot of people. Um, and I think as the technology continues progressing, we saw a lot of new technology, a lot of iterations of other technologies at ISC West last week. I think as that continues to happen, um, that convergence is going to continue to keep moving forward, and we're going to start seeing like these hybrid kind of dudes who know physical, know a little bit of cyber, and have to keep having to straddle both, right? And then we'll have you know fractional fractional leaders and directors coming in to really organize and structure solutions around a specific problem set, and then they may go move on to be a fractional somewhere else, right? But I think it'll be a really interesting time.
Yeah. My final thought for this week is, you know, no matter what happens, the title isn't what matters. I think it still very much comes back to our responsibility, and our responsibility is to the business, it is to the organization, and it is to our stakeholders, and helping them to understand risk. If we can keep helping them to understand risk, we become indispensable. And at that point, we're doing our jobs. We are never going to eliminate all risks, but as long as we're there to continue to support, helping them to reduce risks, I think we'd be in pretty good shape, regardless of where we are in the organization. And with the impending cuts, I think we are all going to face, we still have a responsibility to help them to understand the risk. And Like I said in my talk, um, it's not your job to accept the risk.
Right.
It is the board's job to accept the risk. It is the C-suite's job to accept the risk. And if they, say, no, we're not going to fund this, you just put a note out there, say, hey guys, this is the risk. We're choosing to accept that risk. And then if they come back to you and say, why you didn't do this? Why didn't you tell me? Here you go. You told me to accept a risk. I accepted the risk. And this is the outcome. It's
Yeah.
not my job here to cover your butt and, prevent you from, falling on the sword. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're going to have to fall on that sword and learn. Otherwise, that S in security becomes scapegoat. Sorry. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Absolutely.
that's my view on things. All right, folks. I think that's this week's episode of the podcast. We're hitting an hour right now. Al, I think if I'm mistaken, we are missing next week because of travel.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm traveling. So I'll be out of pocket, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I think we're off for a week, or it's even a late episode. So if anything, we'll see you guys. I think in 2 weeks, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
2 weeks. Sounds about right. Or travel might get canceled and we'll see you next week. You never know.
Sounds great. All right, folks. Thanks for listening in this week's podcast. I'm Josh,
I'm Al.
and we'll see you next time.